The moment Anukika's voice drifted across our team meeting, every nerve in my body went electric. That artificially gentle tone, those perfectly measured pauses between words, the way she tilted her head just slightly when speaking about supporting people through difficult transitions, I knew that voice. 5 years ago, that same voice had convinced my father to empty his retirement account. My manager Kesha was beaming as she introduced her college roommate to our marketing team. Everyone, this is Anika Desai. She's joining us as our new wellness consultant. I've known her for 15 years, and trust me, she's exactly what this company needs. I sat frozen in my chair, watching this woman who had destroyed my family smile warmly at each team member. She wore expensive jewelry now, her hair styled in soft waves that screamed professional success. But that voice, that calculated, empathetic voice, was identical to the one that had whispered poison into grief support groups across 3 different cities. My name is Lena, and before I continue, I need you to do something for me. Could you please take a few seconds to tell me in the comments where you're listening from? Because I want to know how far this story is reaching. And please, if this resonates with you at all, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. What I'm about to share with you changed everything, and I need people to hear this. I work for a mid-sized consulting firm downtown, nothing fancy, but good people trying to build something meaningful. At least, I thought they were all good people, until Kesha brought her dear friend into our world without consulting anyone on the team. See, my father wasn't just any victim. 3 years after my mother died from a sudden heart attack, he was barely functioning. The grief had hollowed him out, turned this vibrant man who used to coach Little League into someone who could barely get dressed most days. That's when he started attending support groups, desperately searching for some way to process the pain that was eating him alive. Anika had been running a circuit back then, moving between cities every few months. She'd show up at grief counseling sessions, always perfectly dressed, always with this tragic backstory about losing her own spouse. She'd position herself as someone who had been through the darkness and found light on the other side. People trusted her immediately. She never called it a scam, never used high-pressure sales tactics. Instead, she'd spend weeks building relationships, learning about people's financial situations, their family dynamics, their deepest fears about honoring their loved ones' memories. Then she'd casually mention this beautiful memorial foundation she'd discovered, one that created lasting tributes while growing the donation to help even more families. My father invested his entire retirement savings, $63,000, into what he thought was a memorial fund for my mother. Anika had convinced him that this foundation would not only create a scholarship in my mother's name but would double his investment within 2 years, allowing him to help twice as many students. The foundation never existed. When my father finally realized he'd been manipulated, the shame nearly finished what grief had started. He never reported it to police, never told anyone except me. The embarrassment of being fooled, of failing to protect my mother's memory the way he'd promised, sent him into a depression so severe that he required hospitalization. He died 8 months later. The doctor said his heart simply gave out, but I knew better. Anuka had killed him, just as surely as if she'd put a weapon in her hands. And now she was sitting 12 feet away from me, laughing at Kesha's stories about their college adventures, already asking subtle questions about our team dynamics and what kind of support structures people might need. The meeting ended with Anika scheduled to start the following Monday. She'd be working closely with all of us to assess wellness needs and implement targeted support programs. Kesha had practically glowed as she talked about finally having someone she trusted completely to help our fashions overworked team achieve better work-life balance. I managed to keep my expression neutral until everyone left the conference room. Then I rushed to the bathroom and spent 10 minutes gripping the sink, trying to figure out what to do with the rage and recognition coursing through my system. I couldn't just accuse her. Who would believe me? Kesha had known Anukika for 15 years. They'd shared dorm rooms, probably each other's secrets, built a friendship that predated any concerns I might raise. Plus, I had no proof beyond my father's testimony, and he was gone. But I also couldn't let her operate here, around my colleagues, around people I genuinely cared about. Because I knew Anna's pattern now. I'd spent years researching her after my father's death, tracking her movements through online forums and grief support networks. She never changed her methodology, just her target demographics and geographical locations. She'd already started sizing us up during the meeting. I'd watched her eyes catalog details, who mentioned financial stress, who looked exhausted, who seemed emotionally vulnerable. She was planning her next hunting ground. That weekend I did something that probably crossed ethical lines, but I needed information. Using my access to our company's background check system, I pulled Anna's employment history. What I found made my throat tighten. 3 jobs in 5 years, all with wellness or counseling organizations, each position lasting less than 18 months, each departure unexplained, with references that seemed oddly generic. Most telling, there were gaps. 6-month periods where she claimed to be freelance consulting but had no verifiable clients. Those gaps aligned perfectly with the timeline of grief support group scams I'd tracked across multiple cities. Monday morning arrived with Anna settling into the desk directly across from mine. She'd brought personal photos, motivational quotes, and an arsenal of wellness books that she arranged carefully for maximum visibility. The whole setup screamed trustworthy professional. Within her first week, she'd memorized everyone's coffee preferences, learned about their families, and somehow convinced 3 team members to sign up for her complimentary stress assessment sessions. She had this gift for making people feel seen, heard, like their struggles mattered to someone who truly understood. Watching her work was like witnessing a masterclass in emotional manipulation. She'd approach people during vulnerable moments, right after difficult client calls, during lunch breaks when someone looked overwhelmed, in those precious few minutes before meetings when people's guards were down. Her conversations always followed the same pattern: validate their feelings, share a carefully crafted personal anecdote, then offer some form of help that positioned her as uniquely qualified to provide support. I started documenting everything, every interaction, every offer of help, every seemingly innocent question about personal circumstances, because I knew she was building profiles, the same way she'd profiled my father and dozens of others. 3 weeks into her employment, Kesha started looking different. Still professional, still capable, but there was a tightness around her eyes that hadn't been there before. She'd stay late more often, take calls in hushed tones behind closed doors, and sometimes I'd catch her staring at nothing with this expression of barely controlled worry. It was Anna who brought it up during one of our team lunches, her voice full of gentle concern. "Kesha seems really stressed lately. I hope everything's okay at home." Our graphic designer Marcus nodded. She mentioned her daughter's been having some health challenges. Teenage stuff, but you know how scary that can be for a parent. "Oh no," Anika's eyebrows drew together in perfect sympathy. "What kind of health challenges, if you don't mind me asking?" "I've worked with a lot of families dealing with adolescent wellness issues." I felt something cold settle in my chest as Marcus, well-meaning and completely unaware, explained that Kesha's 16-year-old daughter Zoe had been struggling with disordered eating patterns. Kesha had been researching treatment options, consulting with specialists, trying to find the right approach without making Zoe feel ashamed or monitored. "It's so delicate," Marcus continued. "Kesha's terrified of saying or doing the wrong thing. She keeps mentioning how expensive some of these specialized programs are, and their insurance doesn't cover everything." Anukika nodded thoughtfully, her expression the perfect blend of professional concern and personal empathy. "That's heartbreaking. And you're right about the expense. Quality treatment can be financially overwhelming. I actually have some background in adolescent nutrition counseling, maybe I could share some resources with her." Every alarm in my head started screaming. That afternoon, I watched Anika approach Kesha's office with a folder of printed articles about teenage eating disorders and a business card for what she claimed was a fantastic specialist she'd worked with before. Through the glass walls, I could see Kesha's face transform from polite attention to genuine gratitude as Anika spoke. I knew exactly what was happening. Anika had found her target. Over the next 2 weeks, Anika became Kesha's unofficial counselor on all things related to Zoe's struggles. She'd stop by with helpful articles she'd come across. She'd share stories about other families she'd supported through similar challenges. She'd offer to review treatment options and help Kesha navigate the overwhelming world of eating disorder recovery. Most importantly, she began positioning herself as someone with specialized knowledge that regular therapists and doctors might lack. The thing about traditional treatment approaches that I overheard her telling Kesha one evening is that they're often too clinical, too one-size-fits-all. What Zoe needs is someone who understands the unique pressures facing teenagers today, someone who can develop a personalized approach that addresses her specific triggers and patterns. Kesha was hanging on every word. Here was someone she trusted, someone with professional credentials, offering exactly the kind of individualized support that felt impossible to find through conventional channels. I realized I was watching my father's story repeat itself, just with different details. The same cultivation of trust. The same positioning as a specialized expert. The same promises of personalized solutions that standard resources couldn't provide. The difference was that this time I could do something about it. But I had to be careful. Anika couldn't know I recognized her, and I couldn't risk destroying Kesha's trust by making accusations I couldn't prove. Instead, I had to let Anika reveal herself. I started small. During team conversations, I'd steer discussions toward topics that might prompt Anika to overshare about her background. I'd mention articles about financial fraud, about people who took advantage of vulnerable families, about the importance of verifying credentials before trusting someone with personal information. Each time I watched her reaction carefully. She was good, maintaining perfect composure, even contributing thoughtfully to these conversations. But there were tiny tells, the way her shoulders tensed when someone mentioned background checks, the slight delay in her responses when discussing professional licensing requirements. Then I got lucky. Kesha had been taking increasingly frequent personal calls, always stepping away from her desk to speak privately. But one Thursday afternoon she forgot to close her office door completely, and her voice carried across our workspace. "I know it's expensive," she said, "but if this program could really help Zoe." There was a long pause. "Wait, how much for the initial assessment?" "That seems. Let me think about it and call you back." When Kesha emerged from her office, she looked shaken. Anika immediately appeared at her side as if she'd been monitoring the conversation. "Everything okay?" Anika's voice carried that familiar manufactured warmth. "I just got off the phone with that specialist you recommended," Kesha said slowly. "The one with the intensive program? Their fees are, well, they're suggesting we consider a more comprehensive approach than I initially understood." I couldn't hear Anika's response, but I could see her body language, the way she leaned in closer, how her hand briefly touched Kesha's arm, the concerned tilt of her head that I'd seen her use countless times over the past month. That night I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to give Anika exactly what she wanted, access to Kesha and Zoe. But I was also going to make sure that when she finally revealed her true nature, Kesha would be watching. The plan I hatched required patience and perfect timing. I couldn't just expose Anika directly. Kesha would never believe me over her 15-year friendship. Instead, I had to create situations where Anika would expose herself first. I started leaving strategic information where Anika could easily overhear it. During coffee breaks I'd mentioned to Marcus how worried Kesha seemed about Zoe's treatment costs, how their insurance was fighting every claim, how Kesha had been researching second mortgages to cover specialized care. I watched Anika absorb every detail, her expression carefully neutral but her fingers tapping that same rhythm against her desk that I'd noticed whenever she was calculating something. Then I began planting seeds about Kesha's desperation for alternative solutions. I'd casually mentioned how frustrated Kesha was with traditional therapists, how she felt like nobody truly understood Zoe's specific situation, how she'd been looking into private practitioners who could offer more personalized approaches. Within days, Anika started positioning herself as our office wellness advocate. She organized optional lunch sessions about supporting colleagues through family challenges. She shared articles about innovative treatment approaches. Most crucially, she began volunteering her services as a bridge between struggling families and specialized resources. "I've built such a strong network over the years," she told our team during one of these sessions. "Sometimes the best support comes from practitioners who aren't bound by institutional limitations, people who can really focus on individual needs." The trap was set. Now I had to wait for her to step into it. It didn't take long. 2 weeks later, Anika approached Kesha with what she called a unique opportunity. She'd been in touch with a colleague who specialized in adolescent nutrition psychology, someone who developed groundbreaking techniques for addressing eating disorders in teenagers. "The thing is," Anika explained to Kesha during their lunch meeting, which I could observe perfectly from my desk, "this practitioner doesn't work through traditional channels. She's found that insurance companies and standard medical systems actually interfere with the kind of intensive, personalized support that really works." I watched Kesha lean forward, her desperation making her vulnerable to exactly the kind of pitch Anika specialized in delivering. "What makes her different?" Kesha asked. "She understands that every teenager's relationship with food is connected to deeper emotional patterns," Anika said, her voice taking on that hypnotic quality I remembered so well. "Instead of treating symptoms, she addresses root causes through specialized coaching that's tailored specifically to each individual's psychological profile." The beautiful thing about Anika's scams was that they always contained just enough truth to feel legitimate. Eating disorders were connected to emotional patterns. Traditional treatment could be limiting. Personalized approaches were often more effective. But I knew where this was heading. "Of course, this level of individualized care isn't cheap," Anika continued. "But when you're talking about your daughter's health, about giving her the tools she needs for a lifetime of wellness, the investment becomes secondary to the results." Kesha nodded, completely absorbed. "What kind of investment are we talking about?" "Well, that depends on the level of support Zoe needs. My colleague offers different tiers of service. The basic program runs about $8,000 for 3 months. But honestly, for lasting transformation, most families find the comprehensive approach more effective. That's about $15,000 for 6 months. But it includes round-the-clock support, customized meal planning, family therapy integration, and ongoing progress monitoring." I felt sick watching Kesha's face. She was hooked, exactly the way my father had been when Anika painted pictures of growing memorial investments and helping other families. $15,000, Kesha repeated slowly. "I know it sounds like a lot," Anika said, her voice dropping to that intimate, conspiratorial tone. "But think about what Zoe's struggling with right now. Think about what it's worth to give her back her relationship with food, with her own body, with her future. And honestly, Kesha, I've seen what happens when families try to save money on this kind of treatment, the halfway measures, the insurance-approved programs that barely scratch the surface. They often make things worse." That's when I knew I had her. Anika was using classic manipulation tactics, creating urgency, positioning expensive options as the only effective ones, and making the cheaper alternatives seem dangerous. But I still needed Kesha to witness Anika's true nature herself. I started phase 2 of my plan the next day. Using our company's client database, I created a fictional consultation request from a local family seeking wellness support for their teenage daughter. I made sure the request would be forwarded to Anika as part of her role as our wellness consultant. The email described a family dealing with financial stress after medical bills, a daughter struggling with self-image issues, and parents desperate for help but worried about costs. I included just enough personal details to make the story compelling while ensuring Anika would see dollar signs. I also made sure the email mentioned that the family had recently received a small inheritance and were considering using it for their daughter's treatment. Anika responded within 2 hours, suggesting a phone consultation to better understand their needs and explore appropriate resources. What she didn't know was that I'd be the one taking that call. Using a voice changer app and a completely different speaking style, I played the role of a worried mother named Linda. I spent 45 minutes on the phone with Anika, watching her work her magic through our office window while listening to her employ every manipulation tactic I'd witnessed her use on my father. She positioned herself as uniquely qualified to help. She dismissed traditional therapy as inadequate. She created artificial urgency by suggesting that waiting too long could make the daughter's condition worse. And most damning of all, she strongly recommended that the family avoid wasting money on standard treatment options and instead invest their inheritance in a private program she could facilitate. The beautiful thing about using inheritance money for something like this, she told me during that call, is that you're honoring your loved one's memory by investing in your daughter's future. It's like they're still taking care of the family, still providing in the most meaningful way possible. Hearing her use those exact words, almost identical to what she'd told my father about my mother's memory, made my hands shake with rage. But I had what I needed, evidence of her pattern, her methods, her willingness to exploit grieving families. Now came the most delicate part, making sure Kesha discovered the truth herself. I spent the weekend preparing. I researched Anika's previous scams more thoroughly, cross-referencing dates and locations with her employment gaps. I printed news articles about grief counseling fraud from cities where she'd operated. I compiled testimonials from online forums where her victims had shared their stories, including my own anonymous account of what happened to my father. Monday morning I arrived early and placed this information in a manila folder labeled, Wellness Industry Research, on the counter in our break room, positioned where Kesha would definitely see it during her usual coffee routine. But that wasn't enough. I needed to create a situation where Kesha would witness Anika's predatory behavior firsthand. The opportunity came that Wednesday when Kesha mentioned she was bringing Zoe to the office after school for a brief meeting with our HR department about a summer internship program. I made sure Anika knew about this visit, casually mentioning how excited Kesha was for Zoe to see where she worked and meet the team that had become like family to her. That afternoon, 16-year-old Zoe arrived with Kesha. She was tiny, fragile-looking, with the kind of nervous energy that suggested she was fighting internal battles nobody could see. Kesha introduced her proudly to everyone, but I could see the worry lines around her eyes as she watched her daughter interact with strangers. Anika was immediately drawn to Zoe, engaging her in conversation about school, interests, future plans. To anyone watching casually, it looked like a caring adult taking genuine interest in a teenager's life. But I was watching more carefully. I saw how Anika's questions gradually shifted towards Zoe's relationship with food, exercise, body image. How she positioned herself as someone who really understood the pressures facing young women today. How she began subtly undermining Zoe's confidence in her current support system. You know, a lot of therapists mean well. I overheard Anna telling Zoe, but they're trained to use approaches that were developed decades ago. They don't always understand how social media and modern pressures create completely different challenges for your generation. What made it worse was watching Zoe respond positively to this attention. Here was an adult who seemed to truly get her struggles, who wasn't talking down to her or treating her like a problem to be solved. I work with a specialist who's developed some really innovative approaches for people exactly your age, Anika continued. She understands that this isn't really about food. It's about control, about finding your voice in a world that's constantly telling you who to be. I knew I had to act fast. Anika was already building rapport with Zoe, already planting seeds that would make future manipulation easier. So I did something that probably crossed several professional boundaries. I started recording. Using my phone positioned carefully to capture audio without being obvious, I documented the rest of Anika's conversation with Zoe. She spent 20 minutes systematically undermining the teenager's confidence in her current treatment team, suggesting that real healing required approaches that weren't limited by insurance regulations and institutional thinking. Most horrifically, she began probing about the family's financial situation under the guise of understanding what resources might be available to support Zoe's journey. Sometimes the investment in proper treatment feels overwhelming, Anika told Zoe, but your mom strikes me as someone who would do anything to see you healthy and happy. And honestly, when you think about it, what's money compared to your well-being? That evening I made copies of everything, the research folder, the recorded conversation, documentation of all my observations over the past 2 months. I put together a comprehensive packet that told the complete story of who Anna really was and what she'd been planning for Kesha's family. But I didn't give it to Kesha yet, because I knew that friendship loyalty would make her want to disbelieve, to find explanations, to give Anna the benefit of the doubt. Instead, I waited for Anukika to make her final move. It came the following Friday. Anika had convinced Kesha to bring Zoe back to the office for what she called an informal consultation with her specialist colleague, who happened to be in town and available for a brief meeting. Of course, there was no colleague. It was just Anna, ready to deliver her closing pitch to a vulnerable family she'd spent months grooming. I made sure I was working late that evening, positioned where I could observe everything happening in Kesha's office through the glass walls. I watched Anika transform into someone I recognized from my father's stories, the grief counselor who had seemed so caring, so qualified, so trustworthy. She had charts, testimonials, a comprehensive treatment plan that looked incredibly professional. She walked Kesha and Zoe through a presentation about revolutionary approaches to eating disorder recovery, complete with before and after case studies and financial projections showing how the investment would pay for itself through avoided medical costs. The program I'm recommending for Zoe is intensive but transformative, I could hear Anna saying. 6 months of comprehensive support including daily check-ins, customized nutrition planning, family therapy integration, and ongoing monitoring. The total investment is $18,000. But I've worked with the program director to arrange payment plans for families who are committed to their daughter's recovery. I watched Kesha's face cycle through emotions, hope, fear, determination, and underneath it all, the desperate love of a mother who would bankrupt herself to save her child. $18,000, Kesha repeated, exactly the way my father had repeated the numbers Anika had given him. I know it's significant, Anukika said. But Kesha, look at your daughter. Look at what she's going through. Can you really put a price on giving her back her life? That's when I knocked on the office door. Sorry to interrupt, I said, stepping inside with the folder I'd been preparing for weeks. But Kesha, there's something you need to see before you make any decisions about Zoe's treatment. Anika's face went completely white as I handed Kesha the documentation, news articles about grief counseling scams, victim testimonials, timeline correlations between Anukika's employment gaps and fraud reports across multiple cities, and finally the background check information showing that Anika had no legitimate credentials in nutrition counseling, adolescent psychology, or any related field. Her real name is Anukika Desai, I said, watching Anukika's carefully constructed persona crumble in real time. 5 years ago, she convinced my father to invest his retirement savings in a fake memorial fund. She targeted grief support groups, just like she's targeting your family now. Kesha stared at the papers, then at Anika, then back at the documentation. This can't be right. Anna, tell me this isn't true. But Anika had nothing to say. For the first time since I'd known her, that artificially soothing voice was completely silent. The specialist she's been telling you about doesn't exist, I continued. The program she wants you to pay $18,000 for is fake. She was planning to take your money, the same way she took my father's, the same way she's been doing to vulnerable families for years. Zoe looked confused and frightened, not understanding what was happening but sensing the adult world collapsing around her. Kesha pulled her daughter closer, protective instincts overriding everything else. Anika, Kesha's voice was barely controlled, is this true? I can explain, Anna finally managed, but her voice had lost all its manufactured warmth. This is a misunderstanding. The program is legitimate. Show me your credentials, I interrupted. Show me your license to provide nutrition counseling. Show me proof that this specialist exists. She couldn't. Because none of it existed. Get out, Kesha said quietly. Get out of my office. Get out of this building. Don't ever contact me again. Kesha, please, we've been friends for 15 years. I don't know who you are, Kesha said, her voice getting stronger. The person I was friends with would never have tried to exploit my daughter's illness for money. The person I trusted would never have targeted my family the way you've been targeting us. Anukika left that night and never came back. Kesha immediately contacted HR, who launched an investigation that revealed Anika had been using company resources to research our personal lives and had been scheduling fake consultations during work hours. But the most devastating blow came when word spread through our small professional community. Other companies began reaching out, asking about Anukika's background after their own employees reported suspicious behavior. The network she'd spent years building started unraveling as people compared stories and recognized patterns. Within a month, she'd lost not just her job, but her entire professional reputation in our city. The state licensing board opened an investigation into her unlicensed counseling practices. Her college friendship with Kesha, the foundation of her credibility here, was destroyed beyond repair. Most importantly, Zoe got real help. Kesha used the money she'd almost given to Anika to enroll her daughter in a legitimate treatment program with actual licensed professionals who helped her develop a healthy relationship with food and her own self-worth. 6 months later, I got a call from a detective in another state. They'd arrested Anukika for running a similar scam targeting families dealing with addiction recovery. My documentation of her methods here had helped establish a pattern of fraud across multiple jurisdictions. She's facing federal charges now for mail fraud and unlicensed practice of psychology. The families she's hurt, including mine, finally have a chance at justice. I never told Kesha that my father died because of what Anika did to him. Some stories are too painful to share, even with people who understand. But I think she knows, the way she hugs me a little longer sometimes, the way she checks on me during difficult anniversaries, the gratitude in her eyes when she talks about Zoe's recovery path. She understands that stopping Anna meant something deeper to me than just protecting our workplace. Revenge isn't always about destruction. Sometimes it's about protection. Sometimes it's about making sure the person who hurt you never gets the chance to hurt anyone else the same way. I couldn't save my father. But I could save Kesha's daughter, and all the other daughters who might have crossed Anika's path in the future. That's worth everything. If this story meant something to you, if it made you think about the people in your life who might be vulnerable to this kind of manipulation, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about ordinary people fighting back against the ones who think they're untouchable. And tell me in the comments, have you ever encountered someone like Anukika? Someone who seemed too good to be true? Who targeted people in their most vulnerable moments? Because the more we talk about these predators, the harder it becomes for them to operate in the shadows. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing that sometimes the smallest act of courage can change everything.